Welcome back to another episode of the Security Champions Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Birch, Director of Application Security here at Security Journey. Today, I am joined with Tanya Janca, also known as SheHacksPurple. She is the best-selling author of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. She is also the founder of SheHacksPurple, an online learning academy, community, podcast, and training company that revolves around teaching everyone to create secure software. Tanya has been coding and working IT for over 25 years now, won countless awards. She's been everywhere from the public service to the tech giants, writing software, leading communities, and founding companies and securing all the things. She's an award-winning public speaker, active blogger, podcast, and has delivered hundreds of talks on 6 continents. Now, better than just kind of my read-off blurb of all the great things that you've done in security, how about hearing from Tanya herself about her security journey and what's brought her to this place doing what she's doing now?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really great. I think that I had the weirdest way to get into security. I was a software developer, and that's not weird. But I was also in a band, and I played music, and so I played drums and guitar, and I sing, and I put out like several solo albums, and then I had lots of band compilations and music videos and stuff. And so I was working at this large governmental organization, and we hired a penetration tester, and he was in a band. So we were instantaneously buddies. And I remember saying to him, like, oh, my band wrote this song called Mandatory Dance Party, and we want to write a mobile app where if 2 people have the mobile app and then they're close together, it goes beep, 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 mandatory dance party. And then we like force them to have a dance party, and whoever's phone shakes the most, they're the winner. And then it just ends. It just plays one song. That's the whole app. I'm like, do you want to write it with me? He's like, obviously. And so we became friends, and he just started saying, like, you should work in security. You'd be so good. And I was like, listen, I make software. I make something out of nothing every day. Everything I do makes my clients absolutely delighted. Like, I just build cool stuff and make everyone happy. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know if there's a job that's better than that. And he's like, no, it's so cool. And so for a year and a half, he pestered me to become his mentee. And then I apprenticed under him for a year. And then I ended up finding more professional mentors. I joined the OWASP community, and I became one of the chapter leaders for our chapter. And I started an OWASP project. And like, I'm not good at doing things in a small way. I'm only good at doing things in a really big way. And so I was like, let's travel the planet. Let's talk at conferences. Let's do everything. And I got pretty excited about it, as you will probably be able to tell from my tone of voice. Yeah. It's not your average entrance into InfoSec. So I was playing guitar.
No, that's amazing. I think the instrumentation is phenomenal for that. Now you're also, so not only thing, you got an AppSec, you dove in, you started building this up, and you didn't go small. You've gone all in all the way. One of my favorite things I actually looked at that you've done is the Alice and Bob Learn AppSec book. And not only is it like, I've looked over it myself. Not only is it a great looking book, I love the graphics, the arts, the premise that you do, and the storytelling. It's quite an interesting way to convey security. And as a teacher of security, I love the approach. What was the inspiration? What led to wanting to write that book?
So I used to work at Microsoft doing developer relations, and I was the security person, obviously. And I worked with this really awesome human being named Brooke. And he double dog dared me to start a blog. And so obviously I had to. And he's like, if you write 4 blog posts, if you write 1 blog post a month for 4 months and you don't have 40 readers, I think he was going to buy me dinner or something. And I was like, it's on. And so then I had way more than 40 readers after 4 posts. But it turned out I love writing. And so I kept writing while I was at Microsoft. And someone wrote me and said, so when are you going to write a book? I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. I don't even know how to write a blog. I'm just goofing around. And then another publisher and another publisher, and they started reaching out to me. And basically the one that became my publisher is Wiley, because Jim Minitel, who works there, he wrote me and he's like, Tanya, what if you wrote a book that you wish that you could have had when you started your journey into application security? Because I started as a pen tester, and no offense to pen testers, it's a very important job, but it was not the right job for me. I'm the social butterfly that like loves talking and being around other people, and AppSec feeds that. I get to hang out with devs pretty much all day. I still get to break stuff. But when you're a pen tester, you spend a lot of time by yourself. And if you're doing older systems like I was, it's often on-prem, which means no cloud, which means me freezing my buns off in a data center. I literally wear a toque, which is Canadian for winter hat, and mitts, and a winter jacket because I'm like kind of skinny. And I'd be like, I think I've had a bug. And so then when I discovered AppSec, I kept starting to do that with my clients, and all the clients started asking for me, but it took me way too long to do a pen test because I was doing threat modeling and I was reviewing their architecture, and I was like, oh, what if I just give you requirements? And my boss is like, what are you doing, Janca? And so it would take me like 14 days instead of 10 days like everyone else, but then all the clients are like, we really want that new girl. And so I finally, one of my professional mentors who I'm still mentored by today, his name's Sharif Kusa, and he was the organizer of the OWASP chapter, and he has been so awesome. He's like, Tanya, it's because you're doing the wrong job. Because you keep doing AppSec, that's what you're doing. And I know you want to help them, but that's a job, you know? You could just have that job, and then you could just work at an organization and help them secure all their apps, and you don't have to leave after the test. Because I felt so anxious leaving. I'm like, but you still need help. And so I like basically I was like, what if I made a book for me that explained this as a job and explained how to do this job and how to get started and how to build a program? And Jim's like, well, what if you just came up with the topics that you wanted? You don't have to write it. Like, he was very soft with me. And then I came up with this list, and he's like, that's awesome. Did you want to write the book? I was like, yeah, okay. And he and the team were so supportive, and really, they're wonderful. And I'm actually writing my second book now called Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. And so the same two characters, but I'm adding more characters from the Alice and Bob encryption characters to have like different people in the book that do different things. And it's pretty fun. It's really fun, actually. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's exciting. I'm going to have to keep a lookout for that book as it comes out. And especially it touches on all the great points, right? We're here, obviously, Security Champions podcast, but we're talking about AppSec. It's beyond that. And now you're taking that next level, secure coding, right? That's a whole different perspective than what I would say almost reactionary AppSec in a lot of ways.
Yes, I agree so much. And Security Journey knows a lot about secure coding.
Yeah, well, definitely somewhere we have a biased opinion in that everybody should be involved in, right?
It's true, though. It's true. When I was a developer, I never got secure coding training. And then they started scanning my app with a dynamic scanner, and it would tell me something's wrong. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And this was many, many years ago, and I remember stumbling upon the OWASP site and being, what's this? Gosh, this wiki's ugly. Their website used to be really ugly. You remember. You know. It's much nicer now.
Yeah, they've definitely gotten a little bit of a lift. One thing I will say is kind of interesting hearing kind of your background and going from that pen testing into this kind of defensive. It actually begs me to kind of go to the question of the SheHacksPurple brand itself, right? Was that kind of some of the what drove the SheHacksPurple style branding? Was the idea of that leaving and including that offensive to defensive?
Yes. When I started in security, I started speaking at conferences just totally honestly to get in free, because I had a really small training budget, and I was just like, I don't mind working tons of hours to come up with a talk and applying to tons and tons of conferences. If one says yes, then I get a free ticket, and that's worth it. And so I started speaking at conferences, and now I forget your question.
Well, it's kind of about the SheHacksPurple, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
idea of like, how did we get there, right?
So I was at OWASP Global AppSec, which was just called AppSec at that time, in Dublin, in Ireland. And this amazing woman named Shannon Leeds had keynoted the conference, and she was like, I was just like, oh my God, like, you know, in a cartoon where their characters, their eyes turn into hearts. I was like that. And so her and I were standing together, and WannaCry had broken out at the conference on stage. And so there was a woman on stage who was not answering any of the panel questions, and she just kept playing with her phone. And I'm like, how rude of that lady to not be answering. And she's like, go away, on the panel, on stage. And then after a few minutes, she's like, okay, sorry, everyone. And her name was Jaya Blue, and she's also amazing. And she was like, my company took one of the NHS 0 days, one of the 0 days from, the American company or organization that does spying and stuff. So yeah. One of their 0 days had gotten leaked, and she had made a proof of concept for Exploit DB so that defenders could look at it. She's like, someone took it and made a malware, and they're calling it WannaCry, and they just attacked all the British hospitals. Oh my God. And she runs off the stage. And I was like, whoa. And so after, I'm sitting there with Shannon Leitz, and she's like, oh, this is happening, that's happening. I'm like, how do you know? And she's like, oh, I'm using Twitter. And I kept looking over her shoulder. I was being very annoying. And she's like, Tanya, they're free. Get your own account. And then you can look, and you don't have to ask me every 10 minutes. You're a grown up now. They're free. You can do this. And so I wanted to make my account be SheHacksComputers because that's what my email is. But it was too long. And so all my friends have been saying, oh, you're the purple lady who can't decide if she's red, attacker, or blue, defender. Because this was when I was doing my I don't know if I want to be a pen tester or not stage. And so people kept joking that I was the purple lady. And so I was like, SheHacksPurple, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not like I'll ever have any followers. And then the fateful thing happened. And then people kept teasing me. My friend Kevin Wall, whenever I'd go to a meetup, he'd be like, oh, and she doesn't even have purple hair. Like, you say you're the purple lady. But so I put some purple streaks in my hair, like just to tease my friend Kevin. And he laughed so hard. It was totally worth it. And so then I started like putting, so I have red and purple now. Because again, I still can't decide. But yeah, it just became the brand. And so then when I made my academy, I called it SheHacksPurple. And a man wrote me, and he's like, I'm so happy you're doing this, and it's so wonderful. You're giving all these women, all this training, but I wish that men were allowed. And I was like, men are allowed? And he's like, we are? And so it turned out tons of men thought they weren't welcome. And I was like, oh my gosh, worst marketing fail of all time. And so I changed it to we, so everyone knew they're included. And we made, I don't know if you can see, there's a cup back there, and it has like the she, but we also made a logo with a man. It's like everyone's invited. All the genders, every person, all of you are welcome. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad he wrote me that email.
Yeah, it's intense how just a simple change in wordage, and whenever we do any of these type of campaigns or even internally, right, it's amazing how quickly you can be non-inclusive and not even realize it.
Yes, and as a person who really cares about inclusion, I was like, oh my gosh, such a fail. But luckily, the errors in my ways were pointed out to me, and so I could correct it.
Well, I love the brand. It stands out for so many great things in what we're doing, so it's amazing. Well, I think we're coming down to the end of our kind of introduction here. We're going to take a quick word from our sponsor, about 30 seconds, then we're going to jump back in and talk about what we're really here to talk about, security champions.
Awareness programs don't provide enough in-depth learning. Ensure your technical teams are getting the knowledge they need to build safer software. Security Journey provides hands-on secure coding training in an application sandbox that allows developers to identify, break, and fix common security vulnerabilities. Give your developers the opportunity to recognize and prevent common and emerging security issues before they become a problem. Visit securityjourney.com to try our training today.
Welcome back to the Security Champions podcast. Here I am joined with Tanya Janca, and we are going to be talking about security champion programs. Now, Tanya, I've actually seen you do a couple talks on this topic. One of the things I've seen that I really love that you have is this idea of a recipe for success when building out security champion programs. You mind kind of giving our audience a few details about that?
Absolutely. So I start with recruiting. Then I try to engage them, and I can go in deeper to engagement, but I just like to go over the recipe. So engaging, getting them more interested, and that ends up attracting more champions. Then I teach them all the things that they need to know in order to be awesome champions. And then I recognize and reward them. And then the last part of the recipe is don't stop, which is the absolute hardest part of the entire recipe. Consistency is so hard, but it's so important.
So before we dive into all the steps, 'cause I would love to talk about each one of these steps a little bit in detail with you. Let's talk about the inspiration though, right? Like what drove you to come up with this recipe? Was it something seen from clients? Was it a request that was made? What kind of became the start of this?
So with my first AppSec program, I didn't know what a Security Champions program was, and I made one by mistake. And so I wanted everyone to scan their apps with this dynamic scanner that we had acquired. And I would do a pen test, but I only had time to do a pen test on maybe 1 in 20. So I was like, listen, scan it with the DAST, fix, I made like a little matrix of, if it's public facing, these are the things. If it's one of our top 5 apps, these are the things, etc. And we started having more secure apps, but very quickly each team just had that one person that was my champ. And I would always just talk to them all the time. I'd be helping them. And we came up with this thing where I couldn't pay them to do this. So my reward was, when the app came to me, I'd run the scanner. And if nothing came up that was not supposed to come up, so we were this big open office, and I'd trot over, and then I'd be like, you passed your scan. And then we'd do this big high five in the air, and everyone would see security just high-fived you. You're awesome. And then if they didn't do it, I'd come over and be like, what happened? Like, man, you stink. You didn't do it. You're so busted. And that was my entire program. And people started wanting the high five. And I remember the top executive was talking to my security team one day. And I was like, oh, just a second. And I ran over. I'm like, Stefan, high five. You passed your scan. And we did this big high five. And then I ran back and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, AppSec. He was just like, high fives? I'm like, yeah, I can't give them a bonus. I can't buy them something. I can't even give them lunch, but I can give them a high five. And so then, I started doing this at each company, not understanding that that's what I was doing. And so then I met my friend Ray LeBlanc. So he writes this blog called Hella Secure. So HELLA Secure. And he wrote a blog post about his Security Champions program that he had done for 5 years. And he's so organized. And so I was like, Ray, tell me everything. And he's like, you've been doing Champions programs for years, Tanya. You just didn't call them that. And so I became more fascinated. And I do consulting via this company called IANS Research, where I do a 1-hour call with different AppSec teams, and I just help them crunch their problems. And so I remember in January 2020, or no, maybe it was already starting in 2019, someone was like, hey, can you help us with our program? I'm like, sure. And so I would meet with them from time to time. And then I started meeting with another one. And now I think I've served 46 different companies. Pretty good, right? Like 1 hour at a time. And I'm like, so here's the plan, and here's how we do it. And so I started writing about it, and people were like, I really like this. Like, could you do a talk on this and tell us what? Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Like, you're going to sit down and listen to me? This sounds great. So I started writing the blog, and I made the conference talk, and then I made the opposite of it. So rather than how to build a champions program, how to be a champion. And it's really been very powerful for me for helping my clients actually get traction with their AppSec programs. Because if you don't have any advocates within the developer teams, like, it's so different when Tanya, the security lady, comes up and says, could you please fix this bug? Or like, you're not following this policy. Can we talk about this? Versus the person that sits next to you all day, that's on your team, the person you have coffee with, they're like, hey man, I thought we didn't do that anymore. It's completely different, the messaging. And so I have a call several times a month now about that, and it's so great. And it's really fun, especially like when we've planned out, like, here's the topics you're going to do, and here's, the goals that you want, here's what you're going to track. And then in a few months we check in and I see like amazing progress. It's pretty exciting.
That's amazing. That's awesome, because you've gotten a chance to start seeing this across so many different environments. I think a lot of the times that even at our own organizations and AppSec engineers, we're with our one company. We know the one way we approach problems. It's kind of the way we get locked into it. You have to see a lot of different cultures that where a lot of different things. One thing might not work in one area, that's working in the others. So the things you have to talk about have to be kind of flexible in a lot of ways.
Yes, I agree completely. Yeah, I even did podcast episodes about it. Like, I really, really like it. So when you're like, would you like to be on the Security Champions podcast? I was like, yes! Someone that likes this as much as me.
Well, let's jump in and let's talk about your recipe a little bit here. So start with that kind of recruitment. Like, getting people to join the program is definitely a hard part that I think is a lot of people in. And I think a lot of times a lot of the knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, I just need people. So you're going to do it. You're going to do it. What's kind of the recommendation you think is the best approach to get the right people into the program that we need?
I try to attract them instead of, I don't know if you've heard the expression, I was voluntold to do this. And it's where, you know, you're forcing someone to do a thing they're not really interested in doing, but they're going along with it. So instead, I try to attract the right people. And I personally believe that someone that's really enthusiastic is a better champion than someone who is extremely senior, but who has limited time and who's doing it because they're told to do it. So maybe they have better technical skills because they're very senior, but they don't have time to dedicate to it. And it's just like, oh, this is my 10,000th task on my list. And And so I try to just attract the people that are interested. And so I do this with, you know, having a lunch and learn. And I know that you've seen me speak at a conference before, but I sucked when I started, just to be clear. I was not good at presenting. One of my talks so I speak French as well, and one of my first talks I had to do was in French, and it's my second language, which I learned as an adult. And my 1 hour presentation apparently took 14 minutes because I spoke so quickly. And the French people were just like, is she okay? And so I'm much better at it now. But basically, like, you don't have to be an amazing public speaker. Just get the message across about things that matter to your organization. And I do things like allowing managers to suggest someone or ask, does anyone want to do this? But they're not allowed forcing someone to do it. A thing that I found worked surprisingly well is changing my signature in my email to, I'm looking for security champions. Is this you? Ask me how. And then having people email me back and say, like, what's a security champion? What are you even talking about? And then if there's, so this one company I worked at part-time for many years, basically coaching their AppSec team, helping them run their program. We did that, and I remember, like, people wrote us back and they were interested, and they asked, what are you talking about? This is your chance to explain to them, like, what the time commitment is, how much energy they're going to need, what skills they need. And basically the answer should be, you just need to be good at your job, and we will train you in all the other stuff you need to know. Because a lot of them feel a bit insecure, like, oh, I don't know enough about security. That's okay. I'm going to show you exactly what we expect from you and how to do it so you're fully prepared. I also like to tell them stuff like, this is going to look awesome on your resume. Another thing is, like, I don't know if our clients will love this, but this is the best way for the security team to recruit new AppSec people, is if someone's been a champion for a year or two and they're really, really awesome, that's your best AppSec person. Like, that's what I did. It's like, I started doing all the security stuff where I worked, and I kept bugging the security team. I volunteered for every security task. And then one day I remember the head of security coming over and sitting in, like, my chair in my office, and he's like, so we're opening up a spot on our team. And I was like, really? Can I apply? He's like, it's for you, Missy. I was like pretty excited. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm a strong believer in that too. The idea that having that developer background, 'cause that's where I started, right? I kind of did parallel. I was learning security while I was working in development though, but starting with that developer building foundation makes really great AppSec people, right? Because there's a easier communication, a depth of knowledge, the processes, everything else becomes just so much easier, I think. Not that it's not possible to be a great AppSec person without it. It just, I think, makes it easier for you as an individual if you understand how to write software when you're doing this job.
Oh yeah, no, it makes it so much easier. It means that you can talk to the developers with more detail than someone that has never coded before. I feel like you can still be a really amazing AppSec person without knowing how to code, but you absolutely must understand the system development lifecycle that your developers are following, or you're not going to get very far. Like if you don't understand, oh, they work in sprints and therefore I need to respect that, you're going to have a lot of clashes and friction. And I remember, so I have this friend named Brendan Shears, and he works with a lot of champions programs. And I had him on my podcast, and he's like, the number one thing that you actually want with your program, which is not what I thought, but bear with me, is reducing friction between those two teams so they work together. As soon as there's no friction, they're getting along, things just magically happen. And the champions care about security, so they're advocating for it, but they also obviously know all the demands of the development team, and so they're advocating the other way. And he's like, as soon as that friction is gone, your program just takes off. And I was like, oh, I'm going to steal that. And he's so right.
So we found the right people. We're recruiting the people. We've gotten the word out there. Now, the next phase of your recipe is engage, right? So what's the engagement part here? How's that different?
Okay, so the engagement is about getting them interested and excited. And it sounds weird, but the champions will talk to other people, and this will continue your recruitment process. So if you don't have enough people, don't panic yet. And so this is actually how one of the security teams got me into incident response, which I thought seemed interesting, but I wasn't so sure. So they brought me on a security incident, and this is something you can do. So if there's ever a security incident with one of the apps where you work, if you are allowed to, bring one or two of your champions with you and get them to help you investigate. And I remember I had asked if I could just sit in on the incident just to observe and learn, and they didn't know yet that it was a software incident because none of them had coded before, and they're looking at this, according to them, goggly goop on the screen. I'm like, oh, that's code. Oh, that's not good. And they're like, what? I'm like, that's SQL injection. Oh, and that's them taking our data. Oh, crap. And they're just like, you can read this? And then I was like, yeah, I'll make a little PowerShell script to deobfuscate it. And they're like, you're going to just write a piece of software? I'm like, oh, it's just a script. It doesn't count. And I didn't even know PowerShell yet. And I was like, don't worry, I'll just write in PowerShell. It'll be fine. And I'm just like, here's the thing. And it just undoes this. I'm like, oh, and then I did this search through this, and I did some regex. And they're just like, she's a magician. But for me, it was just like, I'm just deving, right? And so bringing them on an incident, if you can share secrets with them, so appropriate secrets, so obviously not really intense things, but we had this one team at my first program, and they were so adverse. Their manager would literally say, F off, Tanya. I don't want you bothering our devs with your crap. He is like, you're wasting their time, go away. And like literally I couldn't go to that part of the floor without him standing up and just pointing. And I was like, yes, sir. And so my boss decided he would take over because all the other teams were on board. All of them were scanning. All of them were fixing bugs. Like life was good except this one team. And so he said he wanted to have a super secret security briefing with them. And I was totally against this. And for the record, my boss was right and I was wrong. That's right, Phil. You were right. But basically, he's like, okay, I'm going to tell you about 3 security incidents we had recently because I want you to be in the know and understand. And he made them raise their right hand and promise not to tell. And so he told them so we'd had a keylogger on 6 machines that we had been unaware of through a certain piece of software that they had that had not gone through the proper approval process. And he's like, yeah, and so they had to change like personal banking passwords and all sorts of other things. And so Tanya got to spend an afternoon, and not all of them were technical. And one was a grandma. And like we worked in a giant place with 1,000 employees, and they're like, you know her. She was crying, afraid that her retirement savings would be gone. She was like, Tanya had to hold this lady crying in her arms. Grandmas cry when we fail. And so then he told them about another one. And then the third one was about a bunch of our data being stolen and the damage that it caused and the humiliation and like how we found out was really embarrassing because I got an email asking for a quote for a major magazine and we didn't even know that it happened yet, which was humiliating. We did not give them a quote. And so basically like, you know, he's like, and, you know, Tanya had to deal with this because she was the incident manager and like she had to work all these hours and it was really terrible. And it cost us more than my home to deal with that incident, to give you an idea of how much it cost. And they're like, that's terrible. He's like, that was your app. That was your app that Tanya asked you if she could test it and you said no. That was your app that she told you, she warned you, and you wouldn't listen. And it was because you wouldn't let her do her job. And it was like, and their manager came up to me and put his arm on my shoulder. He's like, this will never happen again. Not on my watch. And they became the ultra champions. They were like leading the cause. Everyone was in the dust now. Their team was like, rah! Like, you know that scene in Braveheart where Mel Gibson has half his face painted in blue and he's like, rah! He was like that from now on. Like every day he's like, Tanya, what's next? And I was like, oh, okay, hi. And so if you can share a secret like that, I was like, they're never going to be on board. Like, we just have to accept this. Maybe I can just fix their bugs for them. So that is a story of like a success, right? Other things you can do is like letting them see everything first, letting them help you choose what tools you buy. So like you're going to get your first stack analysis tool. Awesome. All your champions should help you choose, make up the requirements, try it out with you. Because if they hate it, the other devs are going to hate it too. But if they like it, I remember I did this in 2021 with my champs, right? And one of them said, can we keep it? We really like it. I'm like, I found a winner. This is the tool we're buying, right? And it was huge adoption. The previous stack analysis tool had a 9% adoption after 3 years. We were at like 70% in the first 3 months. Like everyone wanted to use it. Everyone wanted to talk about it. It was like night and day. And it's because I let them choose it. Like I obviously was like part of that process because I didn't want them to choose a non-security tool. Like they're like, this linter is great. We can use this for SAST. I'm like, no, you can use it for linting. Linting's cool. It's not SAST. No. And so I like to create a mailing list where once a month I'm like, listen, this is the event we're having. You're all invited, where we're going to, do a talk or like a little lesson on blah. Here's a podcast episode that I listened to that I think really applies to us because we use, let's say, lots of Ruby and it's about a vulnerability in Ruby. Here's a message from whatever. And so just like, it can be like one page, really short, and just here, I'm still here if you need me. Ray suggested this, and I do it ever since I learned this from my friend Ray, where I try to talk to each champion once per month. And I would ask a million questions and try to start a conversation and be really awkward because that is my jam. But he's like, I just asked them 3 things. What are you working on? What are you going to work on next? And do you need any help? And it turned out that's what I was kind of trying to get to, but it's kind of going around the bush because I'm a Canadian and we do that. And so I just ask his questions now and it's so much easier. Like, what are you working on? And they tell me, and then I'm like, where can I be of assistance? Or, what security steps they're going to need next. What are you working on next? Especially like new technologies, so I can read up in advance and look smart. And then, do you need help? I'm here to help you. And that's one of my things on the engagement list and the recruitment list is, so I remember Ray telling me this. So when I started, I wanted to not be the person that said no all the time, right? Because a lot of security people, when I was a developer, all they said was no. And so I was like, you need to do this thing. Let's figure out how you can do this thing safely. But Ray changed it to, you are my customer. I serve the devs. I work for you. And so if you are having problems with the security of your app, that's my problem. So please tell me so I can make this work for you. So if my scanner is giving you false positives, that's my problem. That's bad customer service. And I never looked at it like that before. And he's like, they're literally my customers. If there were no devs, I would be fired. They wouldn't need me. I serve them. And so when you adopt this mantra of I'm here to help you do your job securely instead of the Department of No, you immediately attract more flies with honey, right? And so he tells people how can I help you today? I believe he jokes around and says, would you like fries with that? But if you can make it so I have this friend named Nicole Becker, and what she does, she's like, the first time I go to meet them, she works at Google in Project Zero, I believe. She's like, I go up and I'm like, hi, I'm Nicole. I'm from security. I come in peace. And she puts both of her hands up. And she's like, everyone has a good laugh. She's like, but seriously, I'm here to help. What can I do for you? And she's like, I immediately break the ice of, I am not from the Department of No. I'm here to enable you. And she's like, and that is the attitude I always bring myself back to. And so from learning from all these smart people in my life, I feel like I've changed that feeling in the meetings and with the champions. And so engagement is part of like how your mantra or like your methodology or the way that you see that you serve them, as opposed to these are these like hoops you have to jump through, and if you don't do them, I'm going to stop you from going to prod and punish you. And that's like the old way of thinking, right? And that does not win. No one wins.
So it's funny is my listeners are probably getting tired of me saying this one because this topic comes up a lot. This idea of our relationship with the development teams and how we work together. And the way I like to pose is the fact is developers are the largest part of the security team. They are the largest part of the security team, and to look at them in any other way is wrong because I'm not in there writing the security control. I'm not the one writing the input validation. I'm not the one setting up authentication authorization. All of the security tasks that theoretically AppSec is responsible for, the developers are doing. I'm just there to make sure it actually happens and to help and to support. I'm not doing the work. I am there to facilitate the largest security team, and that's our developer community, the ones actually securing our applications. And that change in mindset is, I think, so powerful when you engage with the other side, because it breaks down this me versus you. It's you're part of my team. You're the most important part, very much arguably. So how can I help you do your job better?
I agree so much. I definitely agree. Sometimes teams will say, oh, well, you're taking our developers away from their job for so many hours. And I explain to them, actually, almost all the work that the security champions do are part of your team's job. Like your team should be fixing these bugs. Your team is supposed to be looking at these scan results and triaging and deciding which things to fix. I mean, hopefully with our guidance. But I'm like, it is your team to implement. That it's your responsibility. So the only extra work I'm giving the champions is when I'm giving them training on how to do that security work they're supposed to do for your team. So I'm not actually taking 10 hours a month. I'm just taking 2. One is where I meet with them and see what's up and how I can help them. And the other one is like whatever, lunch and learn or presentation that I'm giving where I'm trying to train them on something. So I'm actually only taking 2 hours a month, which isn't that much. Everything else they're doing was already your team's responsibility. You just weren't doing it. And when you flip it on its head like that, suddenly they're like, oh. And if it takes 20 hours a month because you have tons and tons and tons of security debt because you haven't been fixing things for years, that's your team repaying debt, right? It's not the security team making you work 20 hours extra a week. It's that this is stuff that should have been done that wasn't done, and we're rolling up our sleeves and doing it now. I find like when you reframe things a bit, it can be really helpful because like the AppSec team's not supposed to be fixing bugs. We're not. I've done it, but we're not supposed to.
Yeah, that's right. You actually kind of alluded right into the next topic I think is good for us to touch on is teaching our security champions. And that's the next piece of your recipe. So how does the teaching and the training kind of fit into this?
Okay, so I have a bunch of things here. So the first thing is you should have a list of goals of things you expect to accomplish with your program. And then you design their responsibilities around the goals you've set. So if your goals are no more highs or criticals in prod, then part of your goal is going to be that they do lots of scanning and fix lots of bugs. It could be that every new app has a threat model and the top threats are changed in the design so that you don't have them anymore. So you need to have things you're trying to accomplish and then a plan to try to accomplish those things and a plan to measure that you are or are not actually doing it. So that could just be your bug tracker, tracking the bugs and that they are getting fixed. It doesn't have to be super complex. So then when you teach them, I teach them every single thing they need to know to be absolutely spectacular at accomplishing those goals. And so if I want them to run a stack analysis tool, and then I want them to look at the results and, let's say, so I tend to think just because the tool says this is critical, it doesn't mean it's actually critical. And just because the tool says it's a low doesn't mean it's actually a low all the time. So I try to teach them about the threats to their specific system, which I usually discover with them, right? And so, and the threats to the business. So for instance, I was in charge of the security for the election across Canada in 2015. One of their major things is voter suppression. And it was very, very big, specifically in 2015, because it was the first time that the Canadian election cycle was the opposite of the American election cycle. And so all those people that do that terrible, terrible work of trying to cause voter suppression were unemployed. And a lot of them came to Canada, and this was a new threat for us that was much more intense. And so every single system, we looked at it from that angle. And so something that may have been a low for someone else, for us, it's high. Because any Canadian that doesn't get to vote that should have been able to, for us, is a complete failure. And so every single person should be able to vote, know how to vote, know where to vote, and be able physically to vote. And it's a huge deal, right? And so the threats are different for that organization versus SheHacksPurple, which has cute training videos on the internet. And we have like this online community, and I do training for enterprises, but the threats are completely different and nowhere near as serious. Like, what's the worst that can happen? I have to repeat a training, or I have to re-record a video, or I have to add the captions again because somehow they got corrupted, right? Like, our risks to our business are so, in my opinion, like tiny compared to the democracy of my nation. And so it's just not the same. And so when I'm training them, I want them to have that in mind as well. So when they look at these results, first of all, you can always come to me and we'll go over it together. But eventually, like, I love this where they're like, Tanya, no offense, but we've got this. That's the best thing I can hear, right? And so train them every single thing they need to know to be awesome champions. And then I learned this again from one of my super smart podcast guests, this guy named Brian Anderson. Don't teach them stuff they don't need to know. And this is a thing that has been so annoying for me in security, and which is why I started making security training, is I would go to trainings, and some of them were good, but a lot of them had so much fluff. Like, I'm talking a whole day of fluff. Like, half a day on the history of encryption and the difference between every single algorithm. Are we going to design encryption? Is that what these devs are going to do? No. So why are you boring them to tears? I don't care exactly where Diffie and Hellman went to university and what they did with their life after they invented this algorithm. I'm not kidding. It's so terrible. Like, and it's like they know they can charge more if they have more days. I'm like, no. So I try to tear any fluff out. And I see a lot of companies send, this one company, I told them not to do it. They did it. It so blew up in their face. They sent 20 champions to offensive security and got them to do the entire OSCP certification, which cost thousands of dollars in time, plus the cost of taking the exam. All of them failed the exam brutally. None of them ever passed it because it's network hacking. And so if any of them want to change jobs and join that company's red team, maybe they could have had a shot, but then they learn nothing about secure coding. Like, there's almost nothing except buffer overflow, I believe, in that certification. And it's awesome if you want to be a network pen tester. That is one of the options you could take and it would be good. But it's not how to write secure code. And I see so many companies giving them hacking training and penetration testing training. And the devs told me, they're like, yeah, like, it was kind of fun to learn that, but I still don't know what I'm supposed to do for my job. And I don't remember any of it. And so I actually worked with an American company for several months with their devs, and we like iterated on our training over and over until it was exactly what they said they needed to be awesome at coding for their jobs. And like, that company has been very wonderful to me, and so thank you guys. But like, why are we training them on stuff they don't need to know? So sometimes you do want to tell them like a cool thing that's in the news. Like during Log4j, for listeners that don't know what Log4j was, it was a Java library that had a really, really, really critical vulnerability, and it's wildly popular library. And so applications across the internet could very easily be attacked by just putting a couple of characters into the address bar. And so any moron could attack and get very critical access, and that's why it was terrifying. Okay, so during Log4j, having a session about it and telling the devs about it, like, awesome, yeah. And then even if their apps turn out not to have it, I still think you're getting them on board and listening and interested, and it does relate to what they do, and they'll pay more attention to vulnerable libraries in the future. But weird, intense pen testing of networks, no, not applicable. And so that is one of the most important things. I'm also a big fan of job shadowing, mentoring, giving them custom training that is based upon your specific org and your specific threats or your super unique tech stack. Another thing I love doing, so OWASP listeners, there's Defect Dojo, and there's all sorts of other products that are called ASOCs now, according to Gartner. But basically you shove all of your tool results from all your scanners in, and it shows you trends over time, and it shows you metrics, and it helps you keep track of how everyone's doing. I like to take that and pick the 3 things we suck at the most and do a session on each one of those. And that's how I ended up doing a cross-site scripting deep dive. I was like, every single app I test has it. We need to focus on this right now. And so I did that, and then we found less and less and less. And I started seeing old apps getting opened up and fixed, and I was like, I am so good, this is awesome. So like giving them lessons on your specific threats. And so, you know, I know the OWASP top 10 is really serious, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't do anything with XML ever, you don't need to learn about XML external entities. You just don't need it, right? So why teach it to them? Like maybe if they're interested or you want to teach them all about OWASP, okay, but like you could instead spend that session on something that is actually plaguing your organization. So I try to focus especially on stuff that really, really applies to us and my teams. And that takes time, and you can't really hire a company to do that. But like I said, you don't have to be an amazing presenter. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to tell them like why it really matters and why you need their help and what they can do about it. So I have more things, but I feel like you want to, we're only allowed so much time, and I will talk to you all day.
Well, I do think, yeah. Eventually, here we can't spend all day out of here, but I think we're covering some really important stuff. So all the deep dive is greatly appreciated. Well, that kind of, I guess, then takes us to the next step, right? We've got the right people. We're engaging them. We're teaching them. Now I feel like this is about keeping them around, right? So this is kind of the recognition phase. The so what? Why am I here doing this? Besides the fact that you say I should.
Yes. Okay, so I try to do recognition and rewarding. I actually did a blog article about this, and I don't know if you've heard of the 5 love languages, but basically someone wrote a book, and now there's many articles around the world that you can read, and the idea of it is that everyone gives and receives love in a different way, but you can tend to put it down to 5 different ways that are very common, and you usually fall into 1 or 2 categories. And so one of them is like physical affection. Obviously not appropriate at work. So you can give a high five, but that's the most, I don't suggest you run around giving shoulder rubs to employees because you'll get sued. So we don't want to do that one. And then there's gifts. So that would be like a reward. And so we can give them security rewards. So I'll give you an example of that. Then recognition. So that's words of affirmation. So saying really nice stuff to people and about people, especially in front of other people that they respect. And then there was giving them time. And then I forget the other one, but it doesn't matter because it's not appropriate for work. So the 2 most appropriate ones for work in it's that you're not going to get sued for sure, are recognition and rewards. So recognition could be creating a certificate that goes on their wall that says like, I am a security champion, and like, I am, yellow belt, right? And I have seen people that have certificates on their walls from like 10 years ago because they still feel proud about that. It could be an award. It could be recognition in front of their peers. So now that a lot of us are virtual, a special virtual background that says you're a champion. And then in Slack or Teams, putting a star beside their name, like a deputy star, like that's because I'm a champion. And then people will ask them like, that's because I am a security champion. I can help you with your security. I know stuff. And then I try to always put a note in their performance review, and especially if I can get into specifics. So when Brad reported this to us, our tools had missed it. And with And like it resulted in us responding significantly quicker to this incident. And we ended up, solving what could have been a potential data breach. Like we potentially saved hundreds of thousands of dollars because of Brad or whoever, right? And putting that in their performance review. So it's a permanent record of their awesome. I also love telling their boss, I really love saying thank you to their boss. Like, do you know how amazing Jenny is? She did X, Y, and Z. And then that filters back to the person and they get to feel all sorts of awesome because not only have you shown appreciation of them, but then their boss knows about it and that goes into all sorts of things in their future. I remember I had a boss and I was leaving his team to go to another team and he said, why? You can't leave. You're my best employee. Literally at least once a week I get a letter from another team of something amazing you've done. I'm like, well, I've worked for you for 6 months and you've never passed on that message once. And as far as I feel from you, I'm a crappy employee. I only hear when I do something wrong. And so I want to go to the other team because the other team manager has been giving me compliments and telling me what a good job I do. And he's like, he tried to block me, and anyway, I left his team, and he ended up getting fired because apparently all of his employees were unhappy. But like, imagine hearing every week, I hear about how you're awesome, and you never hearing it. That's terrible. So tell your champions why you value them. If they report something to you, if it's not sensitive, if you can circle back and tell them what happened, like, thanks so much for telling me about that team that thinks they could write their own cryptography. I crashed one of their design meetings in efforts to be helpful, and then I stumbled across, this is a true story, I stumbled across what they were doing. I explained, base 64 encoding something twice is what we would do at a Capture the Flag contest for fun as a level 1 challenge because that's so simple to crack, and that's one of the first things we do. And then I was showing them in my web proxy how I cracked in under a second. And I'm like, you just press this button, boom, there's your password. They're like, I'm like, so let me show you how we do encryption for real, right? And I'm like, without you, this could have been a total disaster. So thank you so much. It's fixed now. You don't need to worry anymore. And then there's rewarding. So I worked in the federal government for Canada for 13 and a half years of service. And then I moved on to private industry. But in the government, you are not allowed spending money on stuff. So I would do things like bake cookies or muffins. My team would bring in donuts sometimes that we would pay for out of pocket. We would create certificates and we would print them on our photocopier. But things you can do that are a gift are stuff like a book. So I cheat a lot. So I'll come up with 5 different security books that I wish they would read. And I'm like, I want to give you a reward. I'm going to buy you one of these 5 books you pick. Ha ha ha, joke's on you, you're learning more security. I'll buy them like a YubiKey. I'll get them approval to go to a conference and get them training. If my team can afford to send them on training, I do. I invite them to, so I used to live in Ottawa, so I now live in British Columbia. And we had an OWASP chapter and I was one of the chapter leaders. And in my extremely biased opinion, I thought it was one of the best chapters around the world. And it was this wonderful, amazing community, and it's still there. So if you live in Ottawa, you should go. And we have one in Victoria now near where I live, and it's also wonderful. But what we would do is we would all go and have dinner together and then go to the OWASP meetup together. And so they'd pay for their own dinner, but they would get to have my undivided attention about everything. And then we would go have fun at this thing. I would get them subscriptions. So Safari Books Online, O'Reilly, like anything where I could like talk their manager into helping me pay for things as a reward and a gift for them to say thank you. I also, this might sound weird, but giving them your time and undivided attention has value. I remember I used to be a dev manager, so I was a dev a long time, around 17 years. And so when I switched over, it was quite a shock because dev behavior and social cues are very different than security. But I remember one of my people came over and I was like, 1 second, okay, done. And then I turned away from my computer and looked directly at her. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're so good. When I go visit my team leader, he's typing, he's like, yeah, what do you want? He doesn't even look at me. He's like, she's like, do you realize your body language is like, I am your entire focus right now. I'm like, yeah, this is my job. She's like, usually people are like texting during meetings. They're just not paying attention. You make me feel like I matter to you. I'm like, you do. And so making them feel like they matter, like taking their advice, taking their feedback, listening and changing based on their good feedback. So any of those things that you can do helps them know how much they matter to you. And that's what you're trying to get across. You're trying to get across gratitude. And one more. Okay. Oh, two more. Okay. So one, when I was a dev, we had this lunch and learn thing. And if people went to 5 of them in a quarter, we would all take the afternoon off together. So everyone that reached 5, we would all go for lunch, and you could see us all at 1 p.m. gather in the same place, and we would all go together and play pool, or we had all these silly things that we would go and do together. And everyone else would be like little sad puppies, like, you get to go and I don't. And I'm like, maybe next quarter you'll have better attendance. Attendance skyrocketed, and it was like this great team building. And another one, so this was not my idea, this was from Brendan, lunch with the CISO. So I did not realize till he told me this, that this happened to me. So the head of departmental security where I used to work was named Bill. And every single woman in the entire building had a crush on Bill. He was just the ultimate badass, okay? And he was just like so cool. Like everyone just respected Bill so much. And I became the CISO. And he was like, hey, Tanya, want to have lunch sometime this month? And I was like, what, me? Okay. And then I got his undivided attention for an hour. And he told me how he used to like jump out of airplanes in war zones. And like he saved people and did all this cool stuff. And like he has all these amazing stories. And I was just like on the edge of my seat, like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing. And like he was just like, everyone really, really, really admired Bill. And I was just like, wow. And when I came back, like everyone on my team's like, oh my God, you had lunch with Bill. What was it like? I was like, he told me these amazing stories. And it was this awesome thing. And I was like, and then Brendan, of course, was like, and did it make you feel more committed to your job? I'm like, yes, it did. He's like, and you felt special? I'm like, I did. And so if you give them like one-on-one lunch with you and like undivided attention, like you could do this once a week and over the year get every single security champion easily, right? And it's very small amount of money, it's like $20, right? And I felt so special. And it was so funny to have Brendan tell me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was done to me and it was awesome. And so, yeah, like whatever you can do to let them know just how important they are to you, I guess is the message I'm trying to get across with all my blushing about having lunch with Bill and all the women on my floor being so jealous.
I think that's such a powerful thought there too, because it's shifting away. A lot of people, one of the biggest things is blockers. Like how do I incentivize? I don't have things to give them. Well, as simple as if you can draw it down as simple as just time, right? Giving them that time is enough to start that incentive. Don't allow your lack of resources to be blockers to start something. Start somewhere and then grow as you grow, right? Like get the ball rolling. Don't let it be a blocker.
I agree. But now we've come to the hardest part of every champion's program. Don't stop. This is the hardest part. Like, I see so many companies where I met with them, they made this plan, it's awesome, and then a year and a half later, I meet with them again, and they're like, yeah, the first 3 months were really good. Then we had a security incident, we were busy, so we're like, we'll just do something next month. Well, then next month, we were still kind of cleaning up that incident, and then we had a deadline about this, so we're like, we'll do it the next month. And they're like, and then a year passed. And so if you are doing stuff, so the first suggestion is go slow. So do not plan more than one thing a month to start. And if you can do one thing a month for 6 months in a row and it's no problem at all, then you could add more activities if you feel you need them. But I've seen people, and like I used to do regular streaming and my podcast used to be live. So every single week I did that and I did other streaming. And I found myself really exhausted because I had planned so many things and so many great things. And then I started to like resent Thursday nights where it's like, I know I'm going to have an awesome time once I do it. And then, I'd start my podcast and it would be great. But like leading up to it, I was like, oh man, like, why did I give myself such a grueling schedule of having multiple streams every week? What was I thinking? And so now my podcast is not every single week, and I love it again, and I feel energized every time. And so it's really important you pace yourself as much as you can. If you stop for some reason, so in Canada, we have every single type of person. So we have every religion, every race, every gender, we have everything. And in December, there are a lot of holidays in Canada. So there's Hanukkah, there's Christmas, sometimes there's Ramadan, there's so many, almost every religion has a holiday that happens in December. And being Canadian, we celebrate all of them. And so there's always different people missing from work on different days. So in December, we don't usually have a security champions thing. So instead, I send an email in December and tell them what's happening in January. And I try to have either a blog post or a podcast or something that I think will really, really interest them. And then I wish them happy holidays for every single holiday that's being whatever. I'm like, so I'm still here. You know, this is the vacation I'm taking, but the team's here if you need us. But we're not going to do official gathering this month. But then they know I still care. They know we're still there. They know that in January, what's planned, we have not forgotten them whatsoever. And so if you drop your program, that's okay, but you need to pick it back up. And even if you're like, oh, I'm still in the midst of this crazy Log4j incident, right? Tell them, okay, so, you know, the security team's dealing with a serious incident. Here's how you can help if that is true. But because of that, we're not having an event this month. However, next month we're going to do blah. And this is the date we're doing it, mark it in your calendars. And then you have a whole month to get your act together to do something, right? It's really, really important, the consistency. And you and I were talking about that before we started recording, like we need consistency. And if we don't have it, people think we don't care about them. They forget about us, they get riled up in what they're supposed to be doing, and suddenly the scanner hasn't been run in a few months, or it has been run, but no one's been looking at the results, no one's been fixing the bugs, or they've just been like cherry picking one or two, and they're just like, we'll deal with that later. So if you want to be at the forefront of their mind, you need to re-engage them. Another thing that might sound weird is if the developers have any sort of all staff meeting, or if there's any sort of like all IT or whatever, if you could show up at that meeting and just talk for 5 minutes about cool stuff your champions and you did. So we now have 100 champions. And let me just riddle off a couple of the awesome things that they did. That will make them feel very proud because you're recognizing them in front of everyone. But it also tells the rest of the entire company, especially those devs managers, how much value that they are bringing, and so they should continue to allow them to be a part of that team. And it also is, for once, the security team showing up and saying something good instead of something bad, right? I find a lot of security teams are like, nah, a lot of you still aren't doing MFA, like you guys really stink, blah, 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 instead of, so we've reached 30% adoption for MFA. We are not done yet, but we are in front of most of our peers, which hover around 15%. That said, we're still aiming for 100. And we have like these awards, or we have this, or we have that to incentivize you, etc. I feel like if you can be positive and show up when there's big groups, like, or if the developers have, I used to work somewhere once a month, they had all the devs meet for a meeting, and they would give them a bunch of important updates, and I would give a very short, so very concise, be concise, listeners, be short, to the point, do not drone on and on, it's really important, or you won't get invited back. So I would say a little thing, and then so this one company I worked at, the last 5 minutes of every meeting like this were saved for shout outs, where you would give a shout out to someone else for being awesome and doing something great. So shout out to this person who did this. So I started participating in the shout outs, even though I wasn't a member of their team. I'm like, and so I'm using the name Jenny a lot, but there was this lady named Jenny that was amazing. And I was like, shout out to Jenny, who took the brand new SaaS tool into her own hands and fixed every single bug it found in 1 week and got out to prod. So you completely blew my mind. I thought that was impossible, because we only even release every 2 weeks. How did you do that? You are an amazing lady. Thank you. And so I got to start to participate, and eventually one day I got a shout out. And that was awesome, because I'd helped them solve a security problem. And so if you can like foster this feeling of like everyone appreciating each other, like I remember thinking like, this is such a lovely place to work. They regularly just take this time to make sure everyone feels appreciated. Like, this is awesome. And so don't stop. Just you showing up and giving a shout out for one of your champions, that is you reinvigorating them. And that's you reinvigorating yourself, because then obviously I got an email from Jenny later, right? And then she was like, what's next? I have nothing to do. I was like, oh my gosh, music to my ears. So yeah, please don't stop. Please be consistent. Whether you set up reminders for yourself, you set up a standard monthly meeting, whatever the thing is that you need. There's also some really awesome books on how to build habits. And I've found a lot of the tips in those books. There's a book called Atomic Habits. And I did some of the things, but now I do a whole bunch of the things to help you make sure that you actually keep this commitment to this other team.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best ways I kind of approach this. This is like, at times it's great. At times it's like brushing your teeth, right? You just need to do it consistently if you want the results you want. If you start falling off the wire, you're like, oh, but I haven't brushed in a month. I'll wait another month to brush. No, pick up your toothbrush and start brushing again, right? Like the idea is just because you've stopped doesn't mean like you should push it off longer. The sooner you pick it up, the better you're going to be. So exactly what you said, don't stop. Pick it up and keep on driving. So this is kind of come to the end of our session here. I do have one final question I kind of want to ask. I ask all my guests as we come in as kind of a closeout, right? And we probably touched on a few things here, but I want to get your kind of final wrap-up advice on this. Is one of the big themes this year for me is talking about building the bridge between development and security, right? Because a lot of times it's security saying devs aren't doing this, or devs saying the security is being blockers on this, but it's a middle ground, right? Technically, we're both probably a little bit right, and we can meet in the middle to kind of help each other out. So for you, what do you think the best practical advice is to try to kind of meet in that middle ground and help each other out?
I feel like it's easier for me because I was a developer a lot longer than I've worked in security. I'm still not even at 10 years in security, and I was 17 years as a developer, and I was coding before that when I was a teenager. So I still really identify with them. And I still will often say, us devs, because I still feel like I'm one of them, even though I don't write that much code anymore. I still deal with code a lot. And so I guess I'm used to working like them. And so I'll say, like, when's the deadline on that? Or like, how many other bugs do you have on your plate? Because that's the way I'm used to being, I guess. So meeting in the middle. I guess I like to ask for feedback a lot. So at SheHacksPurple, I ask for feedback a lot, like from my employees about my performance, from our customers about like, do you like this course, or was this event good, or what do you want to see more of, or what topics should we cover? And so I ask for feedback a lot because I've discovered that just because I think this is a really cool topic does not mean anyone else cares at all. I have definitely come up with topics where like everyone's like, that's so boring, no one cares. But I thought it was awesome. And so when I ask lots of people, like, what should I write about next? What topic do you want for courses next? If a lot of people agree, I choose that. So maybe the answer is to ask them, does this work for you? Can I have some feedback? Like, how am I doing? How's our program doing? Do you see areas for improvement? And I don't mean sending like a MailChimp survey, although like that is one handy way. But if you can actually ask, like, so sometimes I'll stay after and talk to someone, and if you could just throw that in there, be like, I'm looking for some feedback. If you're comfortable, like if you could tell me like, what are your favorite parts of this program? Like, what are your least favorite parts, or like, what are you struggling with? Because like when you talk to the champions one-on-one, ideally you're asking them like, what do you need help with? Is everything going okay? But like as you build more trust, they'll start being more honest with you. Like whenever I first show up, I'm the security person, and I'm from that department that previously said no a lot, and although she smiles, we're still suspicious. And so after a while, I've built trust. And I remember just over a year ago working with this company, and the head dev was like, so you say we can trust you? And I was like, yes. And they're like, so there's this thing. And so when they finally tell you a secret, this is a huge moment of trust. So I'm like, oh my gosh, they're starting to trust me. This is awesome. And they're like, so they had, the other part of the security team had bought this tool to take away admin rights. but they rolled it out incorrectly, and it had broken localhost. So all day long, devs code in their IDE, and then we press run, and then the localhost, the loopback, like 127.0.0.1, basically it feeds into itself. It builds this mini baby web server and runs my app on it so that I can see my code in action and what it's doing. I run that 100 times a day. Like when I was a dev, all day long, localhost, me and localhost best friends forever. And it had broken it. So none of the devs could do that. And they only were allowed to release code once every 2 weeks using the CI/CD to go to dev. And so then they'd have to wait up to 2 weeks to see their code change. And then they would fail the CI/CD because they couldn't run any tests because they didn't know the thing. So they're like, a lot of us are failing the CI/CD, which is kind of embarrassing. And so, like, could you help us? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, of course. And so I explained that to the security team, and they're like, our product works fine. And I was like, no, it broke. And they didn't know what localhost was. And I explained, like, they use this all day. Like, you're making them extremely inefficient. Like, you're making it extremely not only inefficient, but unpleasurable to do their jobs. Like, you've broken half of their ability to do their job. You've put a blindfold on them. They literally can't see it run anymore. And they're horrified. And so then they worked with the vendor to figure out what they did wrong. And then they were re-releasing it by the time I left. And the devs were like, oh my God, listen, this is great. And I was like, yes, the AppSec people, we try to help. And so it built trust in this big way between us. And so, yes, it is so important that we listen. It is so important we ask for feedback. And when you get feedback, you must actually do something with it. And sometimes the feedback is, I wish there weren't so many bugs. Well, I wish that too, sweetheart. But try to have empathy, which is a reoccurring theme in many podcasts right now, and try to listen when they give you feedback, because like you can make this huge stride forward in your relationship together.
No, I think that was a phenomenal answer. And it's actually one I haven't heard given directly yet. The actual ask of getting that true feedback from your developer community. Because once again, we serve them. They are our customer, right? So getting feedback from your customer is so important to do your job well. I want to say, Tanya, thank you for the time you've come in and given me the episode. It was an amazing conversation. I think our listeners are going to walk around with a ton of great, actionable information they're going to be able to do. So I really want to thank you for your time and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Well, on that note, just to the rest of our audience, I want to thank you guys for jumping in and listening to this episode of the Security Champions podcast. I hope you join me again for the next episode. We'll now meet with another security expert, and we will dive down into things security champions, or we just find security interesting. And on the final note, I just want to remember, security is a journey, not a destination.